Hello, my name is D. Bruce Shine of Kingsport, and I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee today, December 13th, 2005, to interview William T. Gamble, also of the Kingsport Bar. This interview is taking place as part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Bill, I've known you for over 40 years, but I have no idea what your middle initial T stands for. Why don't you just give us your full Christian name, so to speak?
Full name is William Thomas Gamble, but the only times that I've ever heard William Thomas was when my mother called me in great exasperation because I hadn't come when she called me the first time.
Okay. Where were you born and when?
I was born in Chattanooga, March 13th, 1927.
Okay. Tell me about your family, what your parents did, and your brothers and sisters.
My father was a radio and television repairman. My mother was a housewife, as most married ladies were at that time. I had two sisters, one older and one younger. We had a very typical middle-class family, I would say, during that period of time. Conservative values. Perhaps my parents were a little more conservative than most, to the extent that I, for instance, never had a saxophone in my parents' house. But it was fairly typical. We were not affluent. We always had plenty to eat, but had limited expectations in my childhood as to what might be possible for me in the future.
Tell us about the dates of birth, if you would, for your parents, their full names, and do the same for your two sisters.
Oh, I may not be able to do that. My father was born in 1894 in a little town near Somerville, Georgia. My mother was born in 1897 in a little town near Anniston, Alabama. They married in Chattanooga. My older sister was born in 1925, and she passed away, approximately 20 years ago. My younger sister lives in Rossville, Georgia, near Chattanooga. She was born in 1931, I believe.
Were your grandparents living when you were growing up, and did you know them, and where did they live?
I knew only one of my grandparents. My maternal grandmother lived in the little town near Anniston, where my mother was born. And I spent some time with her in summer in the early years, and she spent some time in our house when she was visiting my mother. Came to know her fairly well. She passed away when I was about 10 years old.
I see. Let me ask you, growing up in Chattanooga at that time, where'd you all live and where'd you go to school?
Most of my life we lived in North Chattanooga, which is across the river from downtown Chattanooga, in an area near Normal Park Grammar School. And I attended grammar school there, later attended Northside Junior High School, and later attended Chattanooga High School, which was back on the other side of the river. At that time, there were only two public schools in Chattanooga, high schools. The other was Central High School, and the one I attended was known as City High School, but it was Chattanooga High School in its proper name.
Okay. As a young boy, you were worked for all three newspapers in Chattanooga, not as a reporter, but tell us about your days as a paper boy.
Well, I had grown up during the days of the Depression, and money was scarce, and my family had looked forward to the day when I would become 10 years of age and could get a paper route to supplement family income. And so I did get a paper route for the Chattanooga News as soon as I became 10 years of age. After delivering the news for a while, it merged with its afternoon competitor, the Free Press, and became the News Free Press, as I recall, and I delivered that for a brief period of time. And then because I wanted to participate in high school athletics primarily, I switched over to the Chattanooga Times, the morning paper, and delivered it for 3 years. After that, and overlapping to an extent, I worked in a grocery store on weekends and worked for a pharmacy. All the time I still had a paper route, and that was my business career through my high school years.
Well, when we were talking coming down for this, you mentioned that by working for the Chattanooga Times, you were able to engage in athletics in the afternoon and high school activities, but it required that you got up at 3 o'clock in the morning. You've been known as sort of a night person most of your life. Tell us about getting up at that time and how it impacted upon your life in the future.
Well, I recall that in the first days of trying to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I had to put the alarm clock under the bed so I'd be sure to get out of the bed to turn off the alarm clock. But after a while, it came to be no problem, and being an early riser stayed with me up until the present time, but it also got me accustomed to getting by with a minimum of sleep, and that has stood me in good stead over the years.
Right. About 4 hours a night?
That was my pattern for a long period of time. I do a little better than that now.
Okay. Now, in high school, you were in athletics, and you also had an opportunity to utilize your interest in music. Tell us about how you started your musical career, because you know, it's as much a part of your life as your profession.
I was very fortunate in high school in having a most unusual band director. He was not formally trained in education. His career had been in the United States Army. He had been in the Spanish-American War with Teddy Roosevelt at San Juan Hill, and had then been on active duty throughout World War I and for a time thereafter, before he retired from the military and became the band director at Chattanooga High School. But his military background gave a different tone to his form of educating than that which might be typical today. He was a great friend of mine, and I particularly liked his form of teaching. He would not spend 5 minutes in trying to teach you anything, but he would spend any amount of time in helping you to learn something that you wanted to learn, and I thought it was a wonderful technique insofar as fitting my characteristics.
Well, here is a man that had been at San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt. He's a band director in Chattanooga, and World War II comes along, and what did he do?
Well, he went back on active duty at his insistence. He succeeded in persuading them to let him go back on active duty. And he was on active duty, as I recall, for a year and a half, and came back to Chattanooga City. They finally forced him out.
Now, he was a real mentor for you, was he not, in terms of music and what have you?
Yes, but not in a formal sense. Since this was during wartime, this was before I went into the Navy, many of the musicians were in the service, so that professional musicians were scarce. Of course, Colonel Summers was in demand as a performing musician and had a lot of opportunities to play for traveling shows such as circuses. And my first real professional employment was playing for a circus with him. And I was still in high school at that time and had many opportunities similarly after that, and down to fairly recent days when I played with the Ringling Brothers Circus.
Well, you were telling me about one time playing with a circus and coming along to playing the clarinet. and you had never really played for a circus before. Tell us about what happened in that instance.
Well, he taught me a lesson about being a performing musician, and that was that you had to get along and go with the show regardless of what the technical demands might seem to be. And the first few minutes of the performance for the circus, when we were performing an overture, they started into one of the typical circus gallops, which moved along at a very rapid rate of speed, and there were long strings of notes for the clarinet to be playing, and much more rapidly than I was accustomed to playing, but I was doing my best. The colonel was sitting beside me with ease, playing similar patterns on the cornet, and out of the corner of his mouth he whispered, "When in doubt, trill." And I've had occasion to use that device many times since then, but he was saying to me that sometimes the effect is more important than the notes.
Well, you know, you play the saxophone, you've played the clarinet in a circus band. How many different instruments have you played?
Well, the only formal training I had until very recently was on piano. I had some piano lessons when I was a child. The rest of my training was in the public schools, and originally I played clarinet, but after I got into high school and under Colonel Summers' tutelage, he would let me try to play any instrument that I wanted to try to play, and it didn't bother him what it might be. So I learned to play some of the valve trombone, the valve trumpet instruments, valve trombone, euphonium, and for a brief period of time played tuba. But in my junior year, I learned very suddenly how to play saxophone. The school ordinarily had what was called a maypole dance on May 1st. And the lead saxophone player in what was then called the stage band was the son of a Methodist minister who, when he heard the term maypole dance used, he decreed that his son was not going to play for any dancing. And so Colonel came to me the day before May 1st and said he wanted me to play saxophone the next day. And he proceeded to find an instrument and show me the difference between the fingering of the saxophone and the clarinet. And I played saxophone the next day and have been playing saxophone ever since. So that's how I got into the saxophone instruments. Some others came along over a period of time. I learned to play flute because it was double that was expected of professional woodwind players, and I play a little flute. Played piccolo one time, found out that I had to go out to the restroom and find out where the hole was that you blew into every time I quit playing.
Well, you know, not only you play the instruments, but you also sing. I mean, you have been a bass soloist and with music groups. You've been singing in the church choir for what, 35, 40 years?
Oh, I've sung in church choirs ever since I was a child, but the adult choirs for about 60 years. Right. And enjoy that very much. And as a matter of fact, had a rehearsal last night with a group that'll be going to sing in Carnegie Hall in January.
And you're with it, and you're still singing every Sunday at First Presbyterian Church?
Yes.
Along with your wife, Anna?
Yes, we've both sung in that choir for many years. Long before we married, my first wife passed away about 8 years or so ago. We were married for 52 years, and Anna and I had been acquainted for 45 years at that time, had many common friends and many common experiences, and so it was a natural situation, and it's been a blessing to me.
Well, we were on our way down, we were talking about the Kingsport Choral Society in the 50s, and I think everyone would be interested in about how you announced to your fellow choir members at First Presbyterian Church that you and Anna were going to get married.
Well, it was a source of some chuckles for us. About the time we were ready to announce our marriage, the office had a little shindig going in which they asked all of the people in the office to bring a picture from their early childhood and let other people in the office see if they could guess who that was. And in looking for a picture that I might use, I ran on to a thing that I'd saved among memorabilia. It was a full page from the Kingsport newspaper in 1953 of a Messiah performance of the Kingsport Choral Society. Anna, my present wife, was the alto soloist. I was the bass soloist, and both had individual photographs on this page. I clipped them out and made up an announcement that we posted on the choir bulletin board, and "To be married," with just those photographs. And from 45 years back, they still had no problem in recognizing the two of us, but it gave us a chuckle.
Well, growing up in Chattanooga at that time, working as a paper boy, and then when you graduated from high school, what did you do?
I had all these other jobs that I told you about, but I went for a time in the summer after graduation from high school to Florida to visit with some relatives, and found employment there for a brief period of time, then came back to Kingsport and found a job at the post office, and had expected to work there as long as they needed my services. And at that time, I had no thought of going to college. That was not a part of the culture of our family. I had only one member of the family on either side that I know of that had gone to college, and so it was not expected at that time that I would go to college.
Right. So you came back from Florida in the summer to Chattanooga, where you were
Yes.
living then, and working at the post office. How is it that you ended up at the University of Chattanooga?
Well, I was sorting mail in an inside distribution system in the post office there, and worked beside a fellow my own age who expected to go to college. His father was, I believe, the superintendent of schools in Hamilton County, and he was going to the University of Chattanooga when the session started, and we talked about his expectations, and he said, "Why don't you go to college?" Well, I naturally thought about it a little bit, but it was only after we talked about how low the tuition was at that time that I had the thought that I'd go to college. And so one morning, after I got through work, instead of going home, I called home and told my mother that I decided to go to college and I was going to go up and enroll. So I went up and enrolled, and that's how I went to college. I kept my job at the post office and worked there on the night shift, not a full night shift every night, but that continued my habits of having nighttime employment.
Well, a lot of Tennesseans don't know that the University of Chattanooga used to be a private Methodist institution before the University of Tennessee adopted it. When I was at Tusculum, we used to play the University of Chattanooga in baseball and basketball. How many students were at the University of Chattanooga back when you were a student there?
Well, I believe it was less than 1,000. I don't know the size, but it was a small school.
Right. Well, you stayed at the University of Chattanooga, and did you go into the Navy when?
I went to the Navy after 1 year of college, and while I was in the Navy, I had some sickness, and after a stay in the hospital, the war ended, and they were discharging a lot of people, and so I was discharged from the hospital to home with an intermediate stop in another facility. But I returned then to the University of Chattanooga, married very shortly after I returned from the service. Finished, I went year-round and changed majors, and finished early, and went to Vanderbilt, again quite unexpectedly. My education was not a pre-planned thing, it just happened.
Well, let me ask you this, before we get on to going up to Nashville. What was your major in college?
My degree is BBA, Business Administration. I took all of the economics courses that they offered there.
Okay. Were you involved in any extracurricular activities? Of course, just having been married and working in the post office, what have you, were you involved in any campus activities?
I was involved in some, but other than musical activities, I did not, there were no fraternities there at that time. There were some student organizations, and I was a member of a political science honorary society and another honorary society that provided some value, but they were not time-intensive activities.
Now, you joined the American Federation of Musicians, the union, when
Yes.
you were how old?
18.
Okay, and we were talking about that, and you told me you used to have to take an examination to be a member of the union, correct?
Yes.
I guess why did you join the American Federation of Musicians?
Well, I was playing professionally, and it was expected of professional musicians that they belonged to the union at that time. Matter of fact, conductors and leaders could get in trouble with the union if they did not have.
Now, were you working gigs at the same time as you were at the University of Chattanooga?
Oh yes, that was continuous. I played regularly in the Navy after I got out of bed, and then
Yeah.
continued to play professionally after I got back to Chattanooga, and have continued to play down to this time.
Well, you know, the interesting thing is you were telling me about your need of 3 or 4 hours sleep a night and how advantageous it was to you while you were in the Navy. Why don't we share with those of us that are listening and watching today how that helped you in terms of your advantages in the Navy?
Bruce, you know too much about me. Well, in boot camp in the Navy, for instance, it was obligatory that you do certain activities for the benefit of the group or just for the sake of having things for you to do. One of the things that was expected was that people stood guard outside each of the barracks and at each of the doors and so forth, and that was a 24-hour-a-day activity, and many of the guys liked to sleep at night. I couldn't stay in bed all the time. They expected me to stay in bed, and so I learned that I could trade with some of these guys, and I didn't have to do my laundry at any time in the service. I didn't do any latrine duty while I was in the service. These guys would do that for me if I'd stand guard at night for them, and so it was an advantageous swap, a win-win proposition.
Right. You couldn't sleep, and so you just take their word. Now, finished the University of Chattanooga with a Bachelor of Business Administration. What possessed you to go up to Nashville to go to law school? How did that come about?
Well, Uncle Sam was paying for my undergraduate studies, and I thought that I was fortunate in that there was no time limitation or expense limitation on that, but I was not aware of another benefit that was available to me. I was drawing disability at that time as a result of my illness in the Navy, and a classmate of mine, Eugene Collins, who practiced law in Chattanooga for many years until his fairly recent death, had a somewhat similar situation as I recall, but at any rate, he suggested to me, why don't you go to law school? I didn't have any specific plans for what I would do after I got out of the University of Chattanooga. And I thought it was an impossibility, but he suggested that I go down and talk to the people at the Veterans Administration to see whether or not benefits might be available under which I might go to law school. And they explained to me at the Veterans Administration that it was highly unusual to finance 2 degrees for a veteran, but that the mandate was to provide the education that would maximize the individual's potential, and they said they would give me a test if it would help them decide whether or not they would do it. So they gave me a test which I assume was roughly equivalent to the law school aptitude test or whatever it is. And I I've been a good test taker down through the years. I finished the test long with it before the time it expired for finishing the test. I had to hunt somebody to turn it into, and they wanted to know why I quit, and I said, I'm finished. And at any rate, I must have had a good score, because they very soon told me that they would let me go to law school and get a second degree. And so Gene was going to Vanderbilt. I knew Vanderbilt had a good reputation, but I had no idea how you went about going to law school. And I just loaded up in the car and took my wife to Nashville for her first trip, and my second one, I think, and went to the law school and told them I wanted to see the dean. And of course, I didn't know who you talked to, but I knew the dean was supposed to run the place. And they took me in to talk to Dale Kaufman, who was then the dean. And I can remember to this day the bemused expression on his face when I told him I wanted to go to law school. And so he asked me about my academic career, and I asked him which one, before I went into the service or after. I had not had good grades in my first year of college, and not a serious student, but when I came back from the service, I had really settled down and had a very good record. And I explained to him what the situation was, and he said, well, come on. And I said, well, when can I start? And he says, well, we've got a summer term coming up. Come on and start in the summer term. I guess he thought he'd get rid of me pretty quickly, because they offered no first-year courses in the summer. It was all upper-class studies. And so I started in the summer, and a fellow who lived across the hall from me, who was an upperclassman, said, fella, you better get down to work or you're going to be gone from here. And so I did work that summer, made good grades, apparently caught the attention of the faculty, and they were tolerant of my activities thereafter. And I went on through school going year-round, and that was how it came about.
So you ended up starting off with second and third year courses before you had even taken contracts and torts.
Oh, that's right.
Now,
I had real property too before I had real property one. You should have seen my notebook when they were talking about cutting off the entail and so forth. Made for interesting reading, but not intelligible.
When you were growing up, were there any lawyers that you knew or who had made an impact upon you, or any particular reason why you went to law school? I mean, was it something you had long wanted to do? I take it wasn't.
I didn't know any lawyers. I had formed the impression from reading, and I did read considerably, that law was an important profession, and I particularly had been interested in activities around the Supreme Court of the United States, and I always thought that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court must be the most powerful person in the American governmental scheme. But I had no real understanding of the judicial system or what the practice of law might entail. I did deliver the newspapers of many lawyers and prominent people on some of my routes, and I guess the real encouragement that I'd had towards doing something other than being a mail clerk came from a fellow on my route who stopped me beside his private swimming pool one day and talked to me about what I was going to do. And I told him, well, I didn't really know that. I didn't think I was going to college. And he says, well, I started out delivering newspapers, and I've done very well. He was then president of the American Bank and Trust Company, and he says, you can do whatever you want to do. And I think that helped me to realize that I might aspire to the occupations of people like lawyers or bankers or something of that sort. It gave me the idea, but I did not know any lawyers specifically or know anything at all about the practice of law.
Okay. Well, here you are, a veteran with a wife, and you're at Vanderbilt Law School. Your children, were they born, any of them born while you were in law school?
No, we didn't have any children while I was in law school, and hadn't until we'd been married about 5 years, but expected to have a family, of course, when I could make a living. The problem arose when that event came along prematurely, and before I had a job other than playing music. Of course, I was making more money having fun than my wife made working full time, but I had not expected that to be the source of our living, and she, of course, was going to have to quit her job, and so when I got out of law school, I had to find something to do.
Well, while you were in law school, you were the note editor for the Vanderbilt Law Review.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about Vanderbilt Law School in the late 40s, early 50s. The student body was, what, basically veterans and older than you might find today?
Yes, that was definitely true. The school had continued to operate throughout the war, but on a much reduced scale. And the class in which I entered was the first large class after the war. It was almost exclusively veterans. This continued for a period of 3 or 4 years, and we had large classes, small faculty, and small physical facility. But most of the students were focused on getting an education. They were serious about it and worked hard at it, and there were a number of people who were my classmates who came to be quite prominent in legal circles in Tennessee.
Well,
Bill Harbison was one, and you were, of course, acquainted with Bill.
Yes. My first year at Vanderbilt Law School, we met in old Kirkland Hall, and and when your 3 years at Vanderbilt,
Correct.
On the top floor of Kirkland,
Right.
and Dean Wade, John Wade, was on the faculty when you were a student. Is
Yes,
that correct?
That's correct.
Who are some of the other names that lawyers in Tennessee will remember that were on the faculty, either as adjunct or regular faculty members back at that point?
Well, there were several who were very prominent in legal education circles who had come to Vanderbilt after having taught at other schools and who were past the retirement age at the other schools. For instance, Dean Merton Ferson, who was the reporter for the restatement of the law of agency, was one of the professors and one of the people that I counted among my friends after I left law school. Herman Troutman came there at the same time Dean Wade did. Paul Hartman came there at the same time that Dean Wade did, and they were all 3 professors of mine. Paul Sanders, another person who had been an attorney at the Labor Department, had come there to teach. Dale Perkins, who was the author of one of the familiar texts in criminal law at that time, was on the faculty in a similar senior situation. There were several others of that
Ray
sort.
Forrester, was he there?
Ray Forrester came after Kaufman left.
Right.
While I was there, UCLA raided the whole campus, took I think 5 people from the law school, the dean of the School of Nursing, and the head football coach, all at one fell swoop. And so we had a turnover in personnel about that time, excuse me. But those are some of the early professors.
Herman Troutman, I remember when I was in law school, and I've used this line as a member of the ADR Commission of the Supreme Court, that Vanderbilt lawyers were prophylactic lawyers. Court was the last place we were supposed to be.
What a description.
When you finished law school at Vanderbilt, after having been note editor, was there any great demand for lawyers at that time, or what did you do?
Well, there was some demand, I think, at that time, although I didn't really explore it when I graduated. I graduated in August, and the fellows who graduated in May had made the rounds of the Nashville law firms, and whatever spaces were available had been pretty well taken up by the time I graduated in August. I had not had the foresight to interview. I knew nothing about interviewing with anyone. There was no such thing as a placement office at Vanderbilt. I didn't prepare a resume, and when I went around to the various law offices, I didn't have enough sense to tell them that I was in the top 5% of my class and editor of the Law Review and winner of the reward for outstanding legal writing, and some of the things that ordinarily one would have put on a resume. And I just said, I went around asking if they needed a lawyer, and of course they didn't need me if they needed a lawyer. So the highest offer that I got was $65 a month, and I didn't think that that was enough to live on, and I decided to try it on my own.
Now, it's a funny story about how you practiced for about a year in Nashville. We all remember our first case. Why don't you tell us about how you ended up in the law office you were in and the first case you had?
Well, another young lawyer who was similarly situated had no place to practice and had tried to hang out his own shingle. And he got a divorce case and didn't know how to go about filing a bill. And I guess he thought since I was on the Law Review, I might have enough sense to know how to file a divorce action. So he asked me if I'd be associated with him on a 50-50 basis in filing suit and prosecuting a divorce action. And I told him, well, I didn't have anything else to do, I'd do that. And so I undertook to prepare a complaint, got ready to file it. By that time, I'd asked him how much was the fee that we were going to share, and he told me $15. And when I went to the courthouse to file the papers, I needed a $6.50 filing fee, and I asked him where that was coming from, and he said that comes out of the $15. So we shared a fee of $9.50, which made my share $4.75. I suppose that that's what set my mind on low fees for the remainder of my career.
Yes. Well, Bill, you were in Nashville and you were practicing law, and all of a sudden you end up in Kingsport with Clifford E. Sanders, who ultimately became a judge on the Tennessee Court of Appeals for the Eastern Section. Tell us about how you got to know Judge Sanders, and then how it was that you ended up in Kingsport after having started off with this rousing $9 fee in Nashville.
Well, I was finishing up, well, let me back up a bit. I had become acquainted with Kingsport in a rather typical sort of fashion in needing to make a living. I had found that Mickey Law Book Company in Charlottesville, Virginia was looking for someone to join the editorial staff. I also had found that Joseph Swidler, who was then the chief counsel for the TVA, was looking for a staff attorney. His office was in Knoxville at that time. And so they were going to finance a trip for me to see both of those places, and I had first visited TVA and then passed through Kingsport on my way to Charlottesville, Virginia, stopped because it looked like a nice place, and had made contact with a Kingsport attorney who was said to be looking for a lawyer, and he invited me to bring my wife there to visit. And so after I'd finished the trip to Charlottesville, Virginia, I went back and got my wife, went to Kingsport, and made preliminary plans to join another attorney, not Cliff Sanders. But after returning to Nashville, that situation didn't develop, and as my wife became larger and the purse became smaller, I became to be a little bit more concerned. And I was out at the law school one day in connection with this article I was finishing, and saw a note on the board there that a Kingsport attorney was looking for an associate. I called the first Kingsport lawyer and asked him if it'd be all right for me to talk to this other one, who was Cliff Sanders, and he said yes, that his situation hadn't developed to the point that he could bring me to Kingsport. So I went down to Nashville hotel where Cliff was taking depositions in an ICC case, met Cliff, and he made me an offer on the spot, and I accepted on the spot. I already knew I liked the town, I liked Cliff, and so with that brief acquaintance, I became Cliff's employee and moved to Kingsport.
Well, before we get to Kingsport, let's just spend a little bit of time in Nashville. I think everyone would be interested in the case that you filed, and you weren't able to follow it all the way through, but a case against the sheriff of Davidson County. Here you are, just out of law school, and you plow some real interesting and unusual grounds with this lawsuit against the sheriff of Davidson County. Why don't you tell us about that?
I'm not sure that it was the sheriff of Davidson County. It may have been, or it may have been an adjoining county, but at any rate, I came to be employed by a person who worked at a filling station, as we called them in those days. He had been the subject of a robbery. He had a nervous problem which made it difficult for him to speak coherently when he became agitated, and the investigating officers who investigated the situation had abused him quite considerably. And so I came to be employed, and we wanted to file suit. And of course I wanted to file suit against the sheriff because I knew that the deputies had only minimum bonds posted, and I had visions of better things.
And you knew where the money was.
Well, I hoped I did.
Yes, all right.
And so I started looking at the law, and my training was to look first at the statutes. And so I looked at the statutes, and I became aware that there was a difference between acts that were done under color of office and acts that were done by virtue of the office. And I can't tell you all the details at this time, but the statute had said that the sheriff could be liable for the acts of deputies for either acts done under color of office or those done by virtue of office. And I had used that statute as the basis for my lawsuit complaint, which was known as a declaration at that time. What I found along the line was a whole string of cases for maybe 100 years that drew a distinction between those two types of conduct of deputies and said nothing about this statute. Well, defense was made under the statute on behalf of the sheriff, and I believe that I left before the case first went to the Court of Appeals, but ultimately it went to the Court of Appeals, and my theory was upheld that the statute prevailed notwithstanding this long string of case law. And the appellate judge said that the statute trumped all of that case law. The lawyers had overlooked it and the courts had overlooked it, that there hadn't been a ruling as to whether or not the statute prevailed. And so ultimately the cause of action succeeded. I think there was a settlement after that point was reached, but that was an interesting case that I encountered early that unfortunately I didn't get to see all the way to conclusion.
And the appellate judge that wrote that was Sam Feltz, who ultimately sat on the Tennessee Supreme Court.
Yes, and I'd gone to school with Sam Jr., who was a classmate.
Did it present any problem all of a sudden, this young lawyer kind of sharing an office, suing the high sheriff, as we used to refer to them? Did that present any problem?
It may have been I didn't get that far along before I left town. I might have left town anyway had I gotten that far. I don't know.
Well, you were talking about an article you were working on. You were out at the law school and you were working on an article. This was after you graduated.
Well, I had written most of the article while I was in school, expecting that it would be the equivalent of a third student note, which is
right.
One of the longer types of papers that we wrote. But I got so deeply involved, and it took so many different interesting approaches, and there was no collateral authority explaining the meaning of a whole host of cases in Tennessee decision law. And so Dean Wade encouraged me to expand it into a leading article, and so I completed it after I had finished my student days, but the bulk of the work was done while I was a student.
And that was an article, Actions for Wrongful Death in Tennessee, for Vanderbilt Law Review back in 1951. It was a significant article. It has over 250 footnotes, and it's not often that a young lawyer who's written an article it ends up being cited by the Tennessee Supreme Court. Judge Weldon White back in 1962 called it an outstanding article, and my research tells me that as recently as 1999 the Tennessee Supreme Court has cited that article on wrongful death.
Was that when they repealed everything we knew or overruled everything we knew?
Well, pretty much. But at least, let me see, that's a 48-year track run for one law review article. Not bad.
I thought it did pretty well.
All right. Now, before we get to Kingsport, let's just do one other thing. Had you thought about teaching in a law school at that point?
Yes, I had. Soon after this mass exodus of Vanderbilt professors to UCLA, where a new law school was being established, the Roscoe Pound School of Law, I got an invitation to come out after graduation to consider joining that faculty out there. And of course, I had some friends out there already, and it was a very appealing situation. But I was quite young, 23 years of age, and had no practice experience, and I just didn't think it was appropriate for a person that age and total lack of experience to be teaching law school. And so, after talking to some of my professors about it, I declined to go out there. After that, I had an opportunity for a teaching fellowship at Columbia. Then I had another offer soon after law school, but for the similar reason that I didn't go to UCLA, I felt it was inappropriate. My interest continued, however, and a couple of years after that, I received an offer from the University of Cincinnati to go there and establish what they were going to establish as a practical skills program. But I didn't think I had enough practical skills by that time, and I did not go there. That was one of the schools at which Merton Fersen had been a dean. But I thought that if I ever had a chance to go back to Vanderbilt, that I would appreciate a chance to consider that, and really had thought that I would accept such a position. And that situation came along when Vanderbilt received a grant to establish what was called the Race Relations Law Reporter, which was the only publication of its kind in the United States when it was established. But that would have carried with it a stipend in addition to the ordinary salary, and was really an attractive situation, and I was favorably inclined to go there and talk to a number of the people on the faculty and people in the Kingsport area. But one of the people whose opinion I sought was Bill Miller. He had been an outstanding lawyer in Johnson City and an attorney who I had practiced with and against for a while before he went to Nashville as United States District Judge. And prior to the time that I had this opportunity to go back to Vanderbilt, Bill, in addition to being United States District Judge, had served as an adjunct professor on the faculty at law school, and I thought that he knew me and my idiosyncrasies and eccentricities perhaps, and I thought I would value his opinion. So I went down and talked to Judge Miller, and he listened to all the things I had to say, and I asked him what he thought I should do, and he was very direct, and he knew me pretty well. He said, "Bill, you'd be bored to death." And that validated what I think was my emerging opinion, and I decided not to pursue that. I continued to have some contacts with people there, and particularly Dean Wade, but that was the last thought I gave to becoming a law school professor.
And so you didn't go to law school at Vanderbilt, but Judge Miller went on to the Sixth Circuit shortly thereafter.
Right.
Now, New York City, Los Angeles loses you, and Kingsport gains you. Tell us about your coming to Kingsport and your practicing law in Kingsport.
Well, you've already mentioned my experience with Cliff Sanders. Cliff had a sole practitioner's office. He had had one associate previously, but that person had left. Cliff had a booming practice. He was quite active in interstate commerce work, represented Mason-Dixon Truck Lines, which at that time was one of the 10 largest motor carriers in the country. And he also had a considerable residential real estate practice, and also accepted personal injury cases. So it was an incipient general practice firm, and there was work there to keep me busy in all three of those fields. Busy enough that after 1 year we recruited Jack Ralston, another Vanderbilt graduate who came there, and then after another year recruited Ed Norris, who again was a prominent attorney in Kingsport.
And a Vanderbilt graduate.
So Cliff, who did not have an ordinary educational background for the practice of law, was building what I think had the promise of being a good law firm. It ended up with all three of us young lawyers moving on to other places, but Cliff was a great mentor and a friend to all of us.
Right. Now, your inability to, as you put it earlier, to stay in bed resulted, as I understand the story, that the Registrar of Deeds of Sullivan County gave you a key to the courthouse in her office, so that when you would get up in the middle of the night at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, you could drive to Blountville and do your real estate work. Is that true?
Yes, or I could stay up there at the end of the regular day and work as long as I want to. I can say these things now. She's deceased and can't be sued for giving me a key to the registrar's office.
Well, and working with Cliff Sanders, you did real estate, you did commercial work, transactional work, and what have you. And then there came a time when you had an offer to move to another firm. And that is a firm that bears your name today. It was then Wilson and Worley.
Yes.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about who Howard Wilson and Joe Worley were, really deans of the Tennessee Bar, and then we'll take ourselves a short break.
All right. Howard Wilson had attended Washington and Lee Law School, and up to the time he graduated, and at least for some considerable time thereafter, supposedly had the highest grade point average of any graduate of that school. He was really an outstanding legal scholar. And Joe Worley had gone to the University of Virginia and had had an outstanding academic record there, and had come to be chancellor of the district in which Kingsport is located. They formed a law firm in 1951, just about the time that I went to Kingsport, as a result of a failure of a firm in Johnson City to be able to establish a branch office in Kingsport. But they had the two of them practicing there with a practice that from the outset was outstanding, with clients such as Eastman Chemical Company, which was then a part of Eastman Kodak Company, Kingsport Press, Penn-Dixie Cement, assistant divisional counsel for the Clinchfield Railroad, and clients of that sort. They had become acquainted with me as a result of my having represented a person in a personal injury case against the railroad. Yeah, quite handily.
All right.
But as soon as that case was through the appellate procedure, they let it be known that they would be interested in talking with me. I, of course, was attracted to them. They both were highly competent lawyers, acknowledged to be good scholars in the law. I thought that their background and proclivities were more in keeping with mine than Cliff's seemed to be at that time. So after talking with Cliff, I did go there for an interview, and in a very cordial exchange of thoughts with Cliff and others in the community, I did move to the other law firm, and I think it was a good move. And Cliff and I still friends, although he's not able to acknowledge that at the present time.
And there you remain till today.
Yes,
for 50 years. And what we're going to do now is take a break and talk about those 50 years of Wilson Worley and Gamble when we come back.
Very well.
Bill, when we concluded we had moved you through your life up to Kingsport and you're joining the firm of Wilson Worley, was the practice any different with Wilson Worley than it had been with Clifford Sanders? And what was your niche? What did you find to be that area of the law that you worked on that you found interesting?
I would not say that the practice was essentially different from that in Cliff Sanders' office. It was a general practice without any criminal practice involvement. My role at first was just a variety of small matters plus engagement in some major research projects from time to time, and Joe Worley and Howard Wilson were both quite good in letting me participate in all of the discussions that we had. Howard Wilson had a way of calling me into, Bill, let's sharpen wits, and we had an opportunity for a great deal of exchange of ideas, and our frames of reference and our method of approaching legal problems had enough similarity that we participated in many things on an office-wide basis. So I was involved at a level past what might have been typical in some offices and typical, not entirely typical of Cliff's office. While I had individual responsibility in Cliff's office, we had more major matters in the Wilson Worley firm than had been the case at Cliff's office.
Well, Wilson Worley has always represented the major business interest in the greater Kingsport area, not the least of which being Tennessee Eastman, or
yes,
now known as Eastman Chemicals. What year was it that the great explosion occurred?
Oh my, that must have been in the early 60s, although I can't put a date on it at this time.
You were doing work for Eastman in the 50s and what have you.
Yes.
And for Penn-Dixie and some of the other major companies. You also started in the defense of the Holston Valley Community Hospital.
Yes.
The firm represented the hospital. Tell us about your early involvement in medical malpractice and how you became known as one of the leading defense lawyers in the state in healthcare.
In the early years of my practice, there was very little medical malpractice litigation in the state of Tennessee, but after the Melvin Belli era and so forth, there was an increasing emphasis on that type of litigation. We represented Holston Valley from the early days of the firm on down to the present time, but the first part of our work for hospital was primarily with internal matters and medical staff matters, privacy matters, consent issues and things of that sort. But the hospital did come to be sued, as did many physicians, as medical malpractice came to be an important part of the litigation scene in Tennessee. And I was first involved for Holston Valley in some of the non-litigation matters that I mentioned to you, but as litigation came to be fairly prominent in the hospital scene, I came to be involved in representing the hospital on many matters, and in recent years on a great deal, many matters.
Right. And medical malpractice being one of the significant areas of your practice in the defense of the hospital and physicians.
Yes, actually, I was very active in defense of physicians from an early time, because upon the formation of State Volunteer Mutual Insurance Company, which is the company that came to represent or have coverage for nearly all of the physicians in the state, our firm was designated as counsel in the Tri-Cities area initially for SVMIC, and we came to represent many physicians as they came to be sued from time to time. And although Joe Worley was the one defending most of those actions at first, increasingly they looked to me for representation, and that has continued down to fairly recent times. About 3 or 4 years ago, I started limiting my defense practice to the hospital, and others in the firm have continued to represent SVMIC and the physicians that are insured by it. While I'm still in touch with the company and one of their approved attorneys, I don't accept assignments from them at the present time.
In the 1950s and 60s, it was a growing time for Kingsport.
Yes.
And old 11W became Stone Drive, and there are all sorts of business development. If I understand correctly, you played a significant role in the development of many of the shopping centers and what have you. Tell us about your commercial type practice and in those years and how it's continued.
Well, I suppose that this is one of the unusual aspects of my practice, because I have had parallel careers, so to speak, in transactional work, particularly commercial real estate development, and also trial practice, both for plaintiffs and defendants. But that goes back to the Cliff Sanders days. I acquired some knowledge and know-how in structuring real estate transactions. When the boom came along in commercial development, I was one of the few Kingsport attorneys who had significant real estate oriented practice, and some clients with whom I'd had prior contact or with whom the firm had contact came to me, and as I did that sort of work, the word spread, and I came to be involved in the majority of the individual developments that came along for a great number of years there. But all that period of time, I kept my trial practice going too.
And you also continued to represent Tennessee Eastman.
Yes.
And you've represented Eastman Chemicals.
Yes.
And Eastman Chemicals being the creation of the separation of Kodak from Tennessee Eastman.
Yes.
And you still represent them today. And transactional work?
Yes, still do that, and also am As of tomorrow morning, we'll be making a court appearance in connection with a class action against Eastman. So I have litigation work with them as well as transactional.
I mentioned earlier the Eastman explosion, and you're right, it was, I guess, in the early 60s. I know I was in law school at the time. That was an interesting experience. Why don't you tell our viewers something about the day Eastman exploded in Kingsport?
Well, this was one of my more relaxed days of practicing law. I was in Bristol playing golf with Jim Lyle at the time the explosion occurs, and we heard and felt the explosion 20 miles away at that time. And a major plant at Eastman had exploded. It was a new technology Lee Davy, who
Dr. Davy's building,
had developed, and it had devastating consequences not only to the plant facility itself, but about 20 of Eastman employees were killed. Others were injured. Nearby plants sustained major damage, and several thousand residences within the blast area suffered property damage to some extent or another, and so it was a terrible incident.
How long did it take you to resolve all those problems and finally put the last file away?
Well, it took several years, and I can't tell you just exactly, but in the ultimate analysis, there was very little trial activity that came out of that. We came to be managers of the defense of all of those claims, and as a result of what I felt was some good planning at the outset, arrangements were made with the major casualty insurers, whereby they would pay all of their claims, and then we would negotiate with them for settlement of their subrogation claims, so that the residential owners came to be represented by relatively few numbers of companies. There was one interesting aspect to that. We made a proposition to all of those insurers that we would pay a certain percentage of their claims, and all of the carriers, with the exception of one, accepted the offer. That one was the carrier that had the greatest number of claims in the whole area, and they wanted to be paid their subrogation claims on the basis of 100 cents on the dollar. We declined, and they filed a pilot suit, so to speak, in the General Sessions Court, and relied on res ipsa as being enough to carry the day for this property owner. We defended on the basis of saying that res ipsa was not applicable, and they had to try it on the basis of negligence. We put on a defense with Dr. Davy as the main witness, won the case on their not being able to prove negligence on that occasion. They regrouped at that time and filed 1,200 cases, I think, individually, and expected to rely on a new trial as getting them over the threshold. Well, we defended on the basis that they were judicially estopped by reason of this unsuccessful verdict, which was adverse, and we said that the insurance company was the real party in interest, and so they were judicially estopped to relitigate that matter. We prevailed on that, and they did not get a cent.
Well, you've always been involved in the bar.
Yes.
I mean, you've been president of the Young Lawyers Division of the Tennessee Bar Association. You've been a member of the Board of Governors of the Tennessee Bar Association. And what brings it up is your mention of the Kingsport General Sessions Court. Why don't you tell us about the great introduction to bar activities when, as a young lawyer in your second year in practice in Kingsport, you were elevated to the position of president of the Kingsport Bar Association, and we had some problems with a judge.
Well, that was interesting. I was young, inexperienced, and totally unqualified to hold that position, but since it involved no real skill or knowledge, I was elevated to the position of president of the local bar association. And during my time in office, our local general sessions judge had a number of difficulties as a result of his fondness for the bottle, shall we say.
He was a judge that once told me that when he was drinking that the only way he knew it was Sunday was by the colored comics.
Well, that's a good story. What brought this to a head was he was arrested either Saturday or Sunday afternoon down in an adjoining county, somehow on the front porch of a total stranger's house trying to stuff a hound dog into a tow sack. But that came to be highly publicized, and the members of the bar felt that it called for some bar action, and so a petition was circulated to seek his ouster or resignation from office. I appointed a committee to investigate the situation and make a recommendation, and the committee investigated and recommended that we try to get his resignation or having him removed from office. I thought it was enough significance that we had to have a bar association meeting. I called a special meeting, made everybody at the bar pay their dues up to date, or they couldn't come to the meeting and participate in the voting. There were 35 members present.
You presiding?
I was presiding. Okay. I had as the chairman of the committee, Mr. Tom Dodson, who was the first lawyer in modern Kingsport, the dean of the bar there, as chairman of the committee that had made that recommendation. Well, finally, after presentation, the matter was put to a vote, and it came down 17 to favor, 17 against. Well, that presented quite a dilemma. So I demanded a recount first. I had a recount, and it came out the same way. And I studied what to do, and Mr. Tom Dodson, bless his heart, had mercy on me, and he said, "Bill, we'll let you cast a secret ballot," which was humorous, but also a way of telling me that as a young lawyer, I need not fear that I'd be supported by the people in the Bar Association. I cast my vote against the committee that I had appointed, and we sought to help the judge rehabilitate himself. He did a good job, served out the remainder of his term without problem, and the whole incident was only a source of humor to the bar after that, but I appreciated the confidence that the bar showed me as a young lawyer.
Part of your work for the profession has included serving on the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Rules of Civil and Appellate Procedure. You did that for 9 years, and at one point you were chairperson of the committee. Tell us something about that work. I mean, procedure is something that we all live and die by. What did you do then in that capacity that was particularly significant that our viewers might remember?
Well, our major project, and one that occupied us constantly throughout that period of time, was developing the rules of evidence. That project consumed many months of development, and I came in fairly early in the progress of developing those rules, but not at the very outset. We had what I thought to be an outstanding array of attorneys. It was an extremely challenging situation in which these representatives of the bar, some having been engaged primarily in plaintiff's practice, some primarily in defense practice, some in academia, some from the judicial fields, all were trying to come up with good workable rules that would be satisfactory to all segments of the bar. And it was an extremely invigorating situation. Mr. Justice Harbison was the judicial representative from the Supreme Court in the early times. He was replaced by Justice Druwoda. We just had outstanding lawyers from across the state who participated in that, and I felt that it was overall an extremely gratifying experience to be a participating in.
Now, you've been a life fellow of the American Bar Foundation. Of course, you're a fellow of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. You're also a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, and you've been there for over a quarter of a century. I know how you become a fellow in the American and the Tennessee Bar Foundation. I have no idea. How do you become a fellow in the American College of Trial Lawyers?
Well, you're invited, and I don't know how that process came about, and I do not know who might have placed my name in the realm of possible members, or just how that was came about. But when I was invited, I complied, submitted a resume, and was elected and became a member. And I've considered it to be a high honor. That's a matter in which not more than 1% of the lawyers in any state can be members, and it's one of the most respected of the honorary associations.
I know you care about young lawyers, and you go out of your way to help young lawyers. I know when I was a lot younger, you certainly were helpful to me, and I know of other instances where you've helped other young lawyers in the Kingsport Bar. What's the change you've seen in the profession in the past 50, almost 4 years that you've practiced law?
That's an interesting question. There was a time that I would have said that the solicitation of business was the biggest change, but about 5 or so years ago, I was reading a history of the judiciary or of attorneys in Tennessee, and I can't quote this or even tell you the author at this time, but the publication was around the turn of the century. And there's a striking paragraph in there that describes and decries the increasing prevalence of lawyers who solicit business. And you could read that paragraph and it would be as current today as it was then, and you would not understand that it was written 100 years ago. So I think that while my perception was that that situation had its origins during my practice of law, I've come to understand that its manifestations have changed and the techniques have changed, but that the tendencies have always been there. And so I can't say that that is the biggest single change, although I think there has been a dramatic increase in advertising and a change in the means of advertising that has not been wholly advantageous from a public standpoint. It certainly didn't originate during the time I've been practicing. I do think there's been another trend that has come to be very pronounced and that I don't personally like, and that is what I think is the increasing emphasis on the business aspects of the practice of law and the centralization of practice in major law firms in which lawyers individually have no real independence but are just hired hands in delivering legal services. That to me is a dramatic change from the legal practice as I saw it in the early days, in which people were largely focused on aspects of real professionalism in the practice rather than being merely hourly employees or much more mercenary in their endeavors.
What about civility?
That's another area in which there's been a dramatic decline. I think that while we've always had the possibility for sharp differences among attorneys at the bar, there certainly seemed to me to be a greater collegiality among members of the bar generally, greater trust. For instance, in the early days of practice of law, I could be with one of my opponents and at the end of the day leave my briefcase with my private file in that person's car or in his office or in his house, have no fear that there would ever be any looking in that file or anything of a unworthy intrusion into private client papers. It just would not have happened, and I had that confidence. I would not have that full confidence today. And in some courts where it's permitted, you find treatment among lawyers, comments that are made of a derogatory nature that would not have been expected in an earlier time. And in general, you don't have as many occasions for pleasurable activities together and the same camaraderie. It's just a different scene.
Is it because the profession has gotten so large that people don't know one another the way they used to?
I think that's a good part of it, but I think that the media has contributed to it also, perhaps unwittingly, but portrayals of lawyers as adversaries who have no rules or boundaries has made for more dramatic presentations in the media, and that perhaps has encouraged lawyers to go in a direction that wasn't a part of their training.
And these television programs sort of overcome what the Elliott Evans Cheathams and the Eddie Morgans of my era would teach in terms of professionalism, which leads me to this question. You know, you were talking about your first case, and you didn't, your classmate didn't know how to file a divorce complaint, and you didn't either. Well, I know when I started practicing law, I didn't know any of that stuff either. And yet today there appears to be almost an intensity among some of the law schools, and I know I've taught in one, where it becomes very, very practical. And one wonders whether we are sacrificing I won't say esoteric, but the philosophical, the thinking process of a law school and replacing it with the trade school.
I think that there's a certain bit of that that's prevalent. I think there's another aspect of it, and that is that we have come to expect the law schools to do a more complete job of training people to be lawyers. Perhaps that's a misperception as to what the law schools can do. But we have lost sight of the idea of mentoring of younger lawyers that seemed to be a part of the bar in the early days. We all felt we had a responsibility to the younger lawyers to help them learn how to practice law and get along together and so forth. Whereas now we leave so much of that to the law schools that they come out without the understanding of this collegial approach that is certainly fostered in England, for instance, in the Inns of Court. We don't have that concept in the United States, and I think that this is a change that I've observed that I think is not entirely wholesome.
Right. You've always said that you practice law to make a living and you play music to make life worth living. You're still doing it. Still playing. Still
doing that. That's perhaps a more personalized expression of it than I would have said it, but I've frequently said that it's not enough just to make a living, that you need to make living worthwhile, that you need to make a difference in some way other than just earning a living. And I believe that on a conceptual, philosophical basis. And music has been a way that I have found to express some of the abilities that I have that I think are consistent with public interest, and have helped not only make living worthwhile for myself, but perhaps of community, help to the enjoyment and education of other people.
Well, which leads me into the that segment of your life when you started the Sunday jazz programs at the over on East Sullivan Street in the old grocery store that when my wife was president of the Fine Arts Center, they converted into the first home of the Kingsport Fine Arts Center. Tell us about that.
Well, that was one of the things that just happened in my life that proved to be really rewarding. I had had an interest in jazz, not only from the pleasure of playing in jazz ensembles and in jazz occasions, but I had a concept in my mind that of all of the music that I had experienced in my life, jazz best epitomized what the United States is all about, that being an art form that's based on improvisation and frequently on collective improvisation, where individuals express their own talents and their own feelings in a way that's expected to be compatible with the similar inclinations of other individual musicians, but in a way where it all makes music together. And I saw that as having some parallel to the American free enterprise situation, in which we each do our own thing but are expected to participate in a democracy in a way that we respect the rights of others, and we try to make music together, so to speak, for the collective good. And I still feel that there's that parallel there. Well, I had on the one hand been developing that idea in some illustrated histories of jazz that I gave to civic groups and colleges and so forth, and also had continued to play. And during the course of my playing and presenting these things, I'd found that there was an interest in jazz that wasn't finding any expression in commercial ways, and I, during this period of time, also started having a few informal jam sessions at my house in which people who were not performing professionals could come and play, and I found that neighbors and others who might have objected to the noise nevertheless found it interesting and would like to come. So I came to have a thought that if we ever had a place to play, an opportunity, that it might be fun to move those to an arena where people might come and listen. And when the Junior League in Kingsport purchased an old grocery store building and intended to devote that to a fine arts facility in Kingsport, it occurred to me that we might just start jam sessions there and let people come and listen. And so we did, with some help from unexpected sources, and it became a smashing success immediately, and some acquaintances that I developed on the national scene came and played, and we came to be able to present programs roughly from October through May of every year for 7 years. Those were on Sunday evenings, were with a few very rare exceptions entirely free. We passed a bucket. If anybody wanted to put any money in the bucket, they did. If we ever accumulated any money, which was rarely, we'd use that for transportation money to bring people in from outside the area to play, and the matter just grew and prospered and until I ran out of energy and didn't renew it. But it was a great success for the community, and even though that's been 35 years or so ago that we discontinued the program, I still regularly encounter people who won't know when we're going to start them up again. They would look forward to having something of that sort on Sunday nights.
We had great people come, like Dr. Billy Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
from New York, a great friend of yours. Who are some of the other great jazz artists that came to
Well,
Kingsport?
we had Bill Chase, who was very popular for a while, both in the jazz and the popular music field. We brought the Buddy Rich Orchestra, Duke Ellington. Buddy Morrow came and played with us several times and was a national supporter of our program. And by the way, he's still around today and playing extremely well. Maynard Ferguson, yeah, just a variety of things that we sponsored, but on a smaller scale, we just had a lot of individuals from not only from Tennessee, but North Carolina and Atlanta and up in Virginia, a variety of places who came and played. We had a variety of college groups from time to time, and just virtually every sort of aggregation that you can imagine.
Those of us in Kingsport woke up one morning some months ago and read in the newspaper that all of a sudden Wilson Worley and Gamble were merging with Moore, Stout, and Waddell. Tell us about how a lawyer, 78 years old, becomes, along with Dorman Stout, the creator of a brand new law firm, which is either the largest or the next to the largest law firm in Kingsport.
Now, don't try to lay all of that blame on my doorstep.
All right, I won't.
Our law firm had thought for some time that it needed greater depth, but in our old facility, we had no space for any more attorneys than we had. The possibility had occurred to us quite some time before that some merger might at some time be advisable, but we had no place really to go. We have been friends with the people in the Moore Stout firm for quite some time. That firm had its origins, by the way, in the Cliff Sanders office with Frank Moore and Dorman Stout, and so
And Dorman Stout, the article I mentioned with Justice Weldon White, when he cited your law review article, a paragraph down, he also notes a Tennessee Law Review article by Dorman Lamar Stout, now of the Kingsport Bar. So you both end up 50 years ago and 40 years ago in a Law Review article within paragraphs of one another, and now you've merged firms together 40 years later.
Well, their approach to practice law had always seemed similar to ours. The types of practice that we had were compatible. The people in both firms had strong emphasis on good ethical conduct and a high degree of reliability in services that were provided without an overriding emphasis on the money aspects of practice of law. So there was a great deal of compatibility there. Our firm had represented Eastman Credit Union for quite some time, and that credit union has grown to be the largest in the state and for many other states around, I suppose. But at any rate, it decided to build a new building in an area of Kingsport that's just developing, and as a part of their plans, they expected to have some space available for tenants and professions, and invited us to consider the possibilities to move to that facility, and we decided that we would move. Now, I had been expecting to extricate myself from the practice of law, but after we decided that a move would be desirable, I decided to stay aboard. And during that period of time, we renewed the interest in a possible merger because we were aware that Moore Stout might have an interest in merging, and there was additional space available in this new building that was going to be constructed. So one thing led to another. We decided to merge, and I decided to stick around and see what happened. And so I take neither the blame nor the credit. It's just one of those things that evolved, and we're very happy with the result.
Well, you stuck around, and which of course leads one to the logical question, how long are you going to stick around?
Well, I have a role at the present time in two major class actions that are going on and have been going on for quite some time. One in which I represent Visa International. That is a class action that well, it has not been certified as class, but is an attempted class action for all of the participants in the Visa and MasterCard arrangements in the state of Tennessee. In addition, I represent Eastman in a class action that is sought to be certified. I believe it's for now 35 states in the country. Both of those are major pieces of litigation that I would like to see to a conclusion if I can. And we're pretty far along, but it might go on longer than I can go on, so I don't know, but that's one of the factors that's led me to stick around for a time. And I'm just still having a lot of fun practicing law, and that's a major factor too. I don't want to stay around long enough that I lose my ability and do something that's detrimental to a client. But so far, no one's threatened me or hit me over the head.
You don't get up at 3 or 4 in the morning now, do you?
No, not if I can help it.
All right.
I generally get up at about 6, from 6 to 6:30.
It's been a pleasure, Bill. I've really enjoyed this. And I guess the question I want to ask you is that we've talked for some time, and I've asked you a lot, but what have I left out? What do you think I should have asked you, or what do you want to tell us? Can you think
I don't
of
know.
anything?
You've covered a lot of territory and some that I didn't expect you to cover, but I think that by and large you've covered it pretty well. I think that there's one thing that I would like to say that's been very gratifying to me. There have been some honors that have come to me of varying degrees of importance, but nevertheless flattering, and such things as being included in Best Lawyers in America, and American College of Trial Lawyers, American Bar Foundation, things of that sort. I never knew how any of those things got started. I didn't invite invitation to participate or be selected or anything, but for some reason somebody in my peer group had thought that I should be included, and I have felt that very satisfying to know that people who are my peers have had some respect for me and have felt that what I have done was worthwhile. And that's a very satisfying experience, Bruce, as I'm sure you know.
Right. The one thing, when you and I are coming down for this interview, we both commented on how we like to get up in the morning, because we had something to do that we were proud of. In terms of our profession, if someone were to say to you, Bill, give us a small critique on where our profession should be going, and with an appreciation of what this nation has achieved as a result of our profession, what would you tell people of where our profession should be?
Well, let me approach it this way.
Okay.
I think the thing, perhaps the single thing of which I am the most proud about my professional practice is that I have not done anything I'm ashamed of. And I feel that that's a worthwhile objective for any of us in the practice of law. There's so many temptations in the practice of law to do whatever it takes to win or to gain an advantage, and that's not really the way the practice of law and the administration of justice should be. And I'm happy to know whenever I look at myself in the mirror in the mornings that I have not consciously done anything to deviate from my desire to do the thing that's honorable in the practice of law. And I hope that younger lawyers will see the satisfaction that can come and the benefits to society that can come from approaching the practice of law in that way. And that's one of the things of which I am most proud and most hopeful that can be perpetuated.
Thank you very much for letting me introduce and question a truly honorable member of our profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you.